Let's get started. I'm very excited to welcome you to BarkFest and to this event with three more amazing authors. And thank you to everyone who's coming to these events, because I know I've seen lots of familiar names. But please still tell me in the chat where you're joining us from. I'm Zazie Todd. I'm the author of WAG, The Science of Making Your Dog Happy, Purr, The Science of Making Your Cat Happy, and my new book, Bark, The Science of Helping Your Anxious, Fearful, or Reactive Dog. And I'm going to get to introductions in a moment, but I've got some housekeeping first of all. So this is being recorded. The recording will go out to everyone after about 72 hours. That's because the video needs a bit of time to process. Everyone who is here live has the chance to win a copy of each of the books. So that would be Sacred Sendoffs by Sarah Bowen, Good Grief by E.B. Bartels, The Other Family Doctor by Karen Fine, and since it's BarkFest, also a copy of my book, Bark, The Science of Helping Your Anxious, Fearful, or Reactive Dog. So I will do the draw for those after this event because I have to wait for the video to process and for Zoom to tell me who's been here live. If you're here live, you're automatically entered into the draw and I will email you afterwards. You'll see that you've got a chat box. It's lovely to see all these amazing places that people are joining us from. Thank you, all over the world. And lots of Americans here today too. That's very good. And we've also got a Q&A box. And please, can you put your questions in the Q&A box? And if it's for a specific author, please put the author's name at the start of your question. And that just makes it easy for us to find them at the end. So I've got Christy here. So most of you know Christy as my co-host on the Positive Posting Conversation, but she's also a Northern anthropologist, an amazing dog trainer, and a staff member at the Academy for Dog Trainers. Hi, Christy.
Good morning.
And we're also joined by E.B. Bartels, who is a nonfiction writer, a former Newtonville Books bookseller, and a Grub Street instructor with a BA in Russian from Wellesley College and an MFA in creative nonfiction from Columbia University. Good Grief on Loving Pets, Here and Hereafter, E.B.'s debut narrative nonfiction book about the world of loving and losing animals, exploring the singular nature of our books with our companion animals and how best to grieve for them once they've passed, was published by Mariner Books. So in addition to writing, E.B. also works as a freelance editor, a manuscript consultant, a writing coach, a tutor, and a senior editorial writer in the Communications and Public Affairs Department at Wellesley College. She lives outside Boston with her husband Richie and their Chihuahua Pit Bull mix, a pair of red-footed tortoises, a small flock of pigeons, and a dozen fish. Thank you for joining us today, E.B.
Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by Sarah Bowen, who is co-founder of Compassion Consortium, the first interfaith, interspiritual, and interspecies community for vegans and other people who care about and advocate for beloved, exploited, and endangered animals. The consortium is a diverse community of people exploring spiritual, philosophical, and religious approaches to animal ethics. Sarah is also the executive director of the consortium's animal chaplaincy training program, where she teaches evidence-based techniques which support people struggling with animal care or animal protection challenges such as grief, compassion fatigue, moral injury, and burnout. She's a columnist on animal-human relationships for Spirituality and Health magazine, and the award-winning author of Sacred Sendoffs, an animal chaplain's advice for surviving animal loss, making life meaningful, and trying to heal the planet. Sarah holds a BA in Human Ecology from Michigan State University, MA in Religious Studies from Chicago Theological Seminary, and she studied anthrozoology at Canisius, and she's joyfully engaged in doctoral research, blazing the field of animal chaplaincy education. Thank you for joining us, Sarah. And we're also joined by Dr. Karen Fine, who is a holistic veterinarian who writes about the human-animal bond, holistic veterinary medicine, pet loss, grief, and narrative medicine. She owned and operated her own house call practice, Fine Veterinary House Calls, for 25 years. Her New York Times bestselling memoir, The Other Family Doctor, a veterinarian explores what animals can teach us about love, life, and mortality, explores her experiences as a pet owner and veterinarian, and was published by Penguin Random House. She also wrote a veterinary textbook, Narrative Medicine in Veterinary Practice, Improving Client Communication, Patient Care, and Veterinary Wellbeing. She's a proud graduate of the Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine at Tufts University and Brandeis University, and she's certified in veterinary acupuncture through the International Veterinary Acupuncture Society. Dr. Fine currently practices small animal medicine in central Massachusetts, where she lives with her family, including an assortment of rescues, and she enjoys walking her dogs, eating chocolate, reading, writing, and horseback riding. Thank you for joining us, Karen. So we're all going to pose for a photo. So I'm going to ask each author to hold their book up for the camera, and we'll just pause for a moment. And if someone can please tell me when you've got your picture. Great, thank you. And you can always get it from the recording if you weren't quick enough just now. So we're going to start with the Reverend Sarah Bowen and talk about your book, Sacred Sendoffs. So Sarah, you're an animal chaplain, and this is something that some people haven't come across before. So can you tell us what an animal chaplain is?
I can, and shout out to some of the animal chaplains I saw put their names in the chat, and you Anzo folks, so excited to be here. So I may define it in a way that they may want to add something else into the chat, but here we go. So an animal chaplain is someone who provides emotional and spiritual support for animals and their humans. So emotional and spiritual support. So some of the things that we do is we use compassionate listening, active listening. We might help people through meditative exercises to be able to deal with emotions in their body. We also tend to do rituals and ceremonies, things like being present with people as their pet passes, helping them prepare for what I call the best worst day. What can we have together for when that moment comes? Doing ceremonies, doing memorials. I love to do furry wakes, which is when we get people together and we share stories about the animal that we've lost. And then we also help people, in kind of the after days after pet loss. We also help folks. We help the animals, and we help people. So we're involved with veterinarians and conservationists, with shelter workers, sanctuary workers, to help in those areas where there are human-animal conflicts and where decisions need to be made. Anyone ever been in one of these situations where a decision needs to be made and you don't like any of the decisions available? Like none of them, right? There's not one that's clear. An animal chaplain helps with that kind of ethical noodling or looking through messy situations to find what your heart really wants and what makes most sense for you. And an animal chaplain is a little different than a pet chaplain. And so I want to kind of set that out too, in that we consider all animals part of the folks that we are attending to. So yes, it may be dogs who we're talking about today, and it may be cats like the ones that are in that room over there. But we also might be talking with people about issues that happen with wildlife or animals who are exploited or captive or who are having other types of challenges. So I think in a nutshell, Zazie, that's what an animal chaplain is. Emotional and spiritual support for any animal and any human.
Thank you. And so why did you write Sacred Sendoffs?
Wrote Sacred Sendoffs specifically because I get a little annoyed sometimes how we bypass talking about death, right? We're uncomfortable talking about death. We see death as something to fear. We're unable to see death as something that can be beautiful, that can be part of the cycle of life, that can be something that is a transition to what I call whatever is next, and something that we can have enduring connections with an animal. We know now from research that closure isn't necessarily what's most healthy for us. Enduring connections is also what can be very, very healing. So I wanted to write a book where I talked about death, right? And with a little sass, a little snark, a little tears, and all of that goes with that experience.
And it has all of that in the book for sure. It's a beautiful book, and it definitely has that the sass as well as the tears. And it isn't just about pets either. So can you give us an example of some of the other types of animals and why you included them in the book?
I'd be happy to. And I want to start by saying this. Would it surprise you to know that we are 0.01% of life on the planet, us humans? 0.01%. There are 8.7 billion of us roaming around this planet, but there are over 2 million other species other than human. 2 million folks, which means there's I'm going to give you another number, and this one's going to make our heads go, wow. 20 quintillion other than humans. 20 quintillion. I didn't even know what a quintillion was until I tried to look up how many other than humans are on the planet. And so when we try to think about, some of the things that are impacting them, for example, urbanization impacts them. Climate change impacts them. What happens when habitats are destroyed? We always talk about how I like to connect to nature, but nature's a habitat. Nature's someone's home. Nature's where other beings live. I'm going to have to mention the word squirrels. And those of you who know me know I'm always going to mention squirrels because they're all over the planet. And we have relationships with them. Some of us might have good relationships with them. Others might be busy trying to figure out how to get them not to go into the bird feeder. But the squirrels don't know there's a bird feeder, right? Doesn't say bird on it. So some of these different kind of things is what I wanted to raise up in the book. Can we look at our relationships with other animals? Because we find that we can have a better kind of approach to eco-anxiety, soulstalgia, all of that kind of stuff we're feeling about the planet, if we consider a lot of other species. And I'll wrap this up by saying research also tells us that when we're compassionate to other animals and we consider the needs of other animals, we're also more compassionate to other humans. We have a ton of research that tells us that. So being compassionate to squirrels, folks, might make you nicer to your husband or your wife or someone else in your family the next time they annoy you.
Good to know. So your books blend science and spirituality, which are two things that some people think don't go together. But what do you think are the benefits of having both approaches?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is that I see spirituality and science as two different languages for describing how we experience the world. They're not opposites, they're complementary. Spirituality can talk to some of the mysterious things that we don't necessarily have science for yet, or some of the things that we might feel that might be a little more personal to us, that are experiential in a way that when we apply scientific language, it loses a little bit of their magic, right? We lose a little bit of the feeling of things sometimes when we break it down to what's happening physiologically. So spirituality and science can be used together to have a really great picture of the world. When we talk about things like wonder and awe and moments where all of a sudden we feel like we are connected to everything in the world and we don't exist anymore, right? That's a moment of spirituality. I think the other reason, Zazie, is that when we look at end of life and we look at afterlife, spirituality and religion really impact our beliefs about what's going to happen at that moment. Even if we're unaffiliated with a religious tradition or spiritual tradition, there are stories or beliefs that we might have about where an animal goes, what happens, is there a soul? All of these kind of questions have their roots in religious and spiritual thinking. And so being able to understand where those thoughts came from and where those beliefs came from helps us work through some of our thoughts about what's going to happen or what might happen. We don't know for sure, right? But we have some different beautiful ways of thinking about it. One of my favorite is the Buddhist belief in the bardo, which means after a cat or a dog dies or any other animal, for 7 weeks, they are in this transient state called the bardo, and you can still connect to them, leave their food bowl out, talk to them, tell them you miss them. It will help them in their transition to whatever's next. There's a place where spirituality might offer something that science doesn't.
And that actually leads into my next question, because your book includes lots of practical tips for coping with loss. And I wondered if you could share one of those tips with us, please.
Sure. There's a lot of different kind of practical things you can do, right? We always want to do, what can I do to get away from whatever I'm feeling or to cope with whatever I'm feeling? Number one is other people and support. Number one is not going it alone. Okay. So find people who get it If you don't have people around you who get it and say, oh, it's just a dog, find an animal chaplain. Go to findanimalchaplain.com. You can find one of us, right? We are happy to talk to you about anything. The second thing, when you find someone, be real, be honest, and use the words you're afraid to say. Say the unsayable. We often want to filter our language. We want to filter what we really feel because we want to make it more palatable. We're dealing with guilt and shame and all sorts of emotions we don't need to do. Say what's on your mind. Say the unsayable to someone. That has a lot of impact on our emotions when we can offload and unload that to someone with a compassionate ear who says, yeah. And if you're dealing with a friend who has a loss, let them say the unsayable. And be really careful not to all of a sudden snap to, it's not your fault, you couldn't have known. For healing, we need to say the things that we don't feel so good about. So listen to people when they share their stories and say, wow, what does that feel like? That sounds hard. Can I sit with you with that? Instead of jumping to, it's okay, it's not your fault, you'll get over it, right? We bypass that. So find people that get you, talk honestly, say the unsayable, and be able to sit with that a little bit. That's how we heal.
Thank you, Sarah. And I know that you've prepared a reading from the book, so I'm going to ask you to do your reading now, and the rest of us will just go off camera while you do the reading.
All righty, folks. Here we go. A reading from Sacred Sendoffs. Chapter 1. He is the first experience of death that I can recall. A shiny black cat with a talent for hunting. He appeared while my mother was pregnant with me. Offering her mangled birds and half-dead chipmunks, he set in motion my dharma as an animal chaplain. My mother began to leave out bowls of tasty meow mix, hoping to end the furry and feathered sacrifices. Soon, noticing the new family member, a neighbor queried, "Hey, pretty cat, what's her name?" My father replied, "It's not a her, it's a him." The cat turned in response and thus was named him. When I was 6 years old, I also began bringing lifeless animals to my mother. Using my lunchbox as a makeshift hearse, I gathered tiny road-killed bodies, transporting them home for a funeral. I would often arrive at the house distracted by some other captivating idea and leave an accidental surprise for my mother in the kitchen. "Sarah, come take care of this dead critter," she would implore me. A memorial would commence, with me offering the words, "May the force be with you, chipmunk." When I was barely 13, Him the cat swaggered through our front yard with the hind end of a chipmunk dangling from his clenched mouth. Shouting, I pried the critter free and tossed the cat into our house. Although the chipmunk was intact, the little one walked in circles, seemingly stunned. Both my parents were at work, so I grabbed the phone book and I called the small animal clinic of the local university. Crying, I explained the situation and was informed that I could bring the animal in for a $90 assessment fee that I didn't have. I stuttered a goodbye, then placed the wriggling little body in my father's hosta bushes, hoping for the best. A few months before I turned 16, the cat Him's back legs failed while walking across our family room chestnut-colored shag carpet. My parents were at their workplaces, and I was still a few months shy of getting a driver's license. And I sobbed, feeling powerless. These were the days before the internet and cell phones, before you could Google, "Why are my cat's back legs not working?" I didn't even know the name of our vet. My parents did. My sister Amy took the lead, making a cozy bed out of blankets for the struggling feline. We fidgeted by his side. When Dad arrived home, he scooped up the cat and drove off. Amy and I waited patiently, praying fiercely, but him never returned. He was not the first of our animal companions to die. That honor went to Fluffy, who'd eaten rat poison in a neighbor's garage 5 years earlier. And he wouldn't be the last cat. Looking back, I realized that we never memorialized him, or any of our feline family members during my childhood, for that matter. With all my chipmunk and squirrel burial expertise considered, I guess I didn't know what to do without a body. Well, fast forward a few decades, 11 more pet cat fatalities, and him's influence lives on in me. A few times a week, I pull my Jeep onto a gravel shoulder to move a dead animal off the road. Kneeling by the body, I offer words of apology. I am so sorry about us humans. Followed by a blessing. May you have a most auspicious next lifetime. A sign on my car door explains to curious onlookers what I'm up to. Sarah B's Roadkill Ministry. Other days, I support individual humans as they care for and then hospicize or euthanize or memorialize their four-legged family members. I ensure these deaths are witnessed. Their bodies are treated with reverence in partnership with the humans who love them. I give each one a sacred send-off. And so you will likely be unsurprised to learn that 3 cats and my father sit on a shelf right behind me. Not in lunchboxes. I have matured to elegant urns. Meet Ringo Petrocelli. Therein ends the reading from Chapter 1 of Sacred Sendoffs. If that touched you in some way and you'd like to read more, pick up a copy of the book. Zazie, thank you so much for allowing me some space to talk about what I do.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was beautiful, and I definitely recommend the book to everyone here. So thank you. That was very beautiful reading. And I'm going to hand over to Christy and Evie.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was a lovely reading. So Evie, why did you decide to write this book?
Sure. Well, I have always been someone who's had a lot of pets. Growing up, I loved animals. I had pets at school, I had pets at home. And as of right now, we still have not figured out a way to let pets live forever. So someone who's had a lot of pets means I'm also someone who's had a lot of pets die. Um, And I always felt really upset about this as a kid and as an adult, as a young adult when I was in college, and I found out we had to euthanize my childhood dog. And I had a lot of close friends who also loved animals, and I did feel like I had people I could talk to about it. But sometimes I wondered, was I overreacting? Did other people feel this same, extreme sadness when they lost their pets? And I wanted to investigate that idea a little bit. And I started writing these short essays about pets I'd had, and the different ways that we mourned them and remembered them in my family. And I shared them with some friends when I was in my grad school writing program. And I was blown away by the responses I got, where other people came out of the woodwork and said, I've never talked to anyone else about this before, but my family and I used to sneak into our neighborhood park at night to bury our parakeets. Or, people had all these wonderful stories about, funerals they attended for friends' cats, or different rituals they had every year to remember their dogs on their birthdays. And it was honestly, a sad subject, but also really delightful and wonderful to have people start sharing all these different things with me. And I was really excited to learn all this and start to do some research into not just how people in, my present life mourn and remember their animals, but also people across the planet and also throughout history. And what I learned is pretty much that as long as we've had pets, we have been mourning pets, and we have been trying to find ways to celebrate and honor those pets. So I was inspired to write this book about my own pet losses and the things I've done throughout my life to mourn and remember them, and also trying to weave in as many other things that I learned as possible as well.
Like following on that, you mentioned in your book that grief for pets is often disenfranchised. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so when I was first, starting to write about this topic and research it, I was nervous because I felt, was I overreacting? Was this something other people felt? And disenfranchised grief are types of grief that we, as a society, don't really talk about as much. I mean, as Sarah already brought up, I think that especially in America, people are very weird about talking about death in general. But there's some types of death that I feel like people are more familiar with. So the death of a grandparent, maybe, or the death of a parent. Those are things that maybe people understand or can relate to. But when it comes to certain disenfranchised types of grief, which can be anything from the death of a pet to a miscarriage, to losing your home in a fire, to going through a divorce, like there's so many more subtle ways you can feel grief and mourn. People often feel uncomfortable talking about those things because they're not sure the reaction they're going to get. So, when I, would mention, oh, I'm feeling really down because like I put down my dog last week, I never knew if I was going to find somebody, like Sarah or like Karen here, who would immediately say, oh my gosh, like I've been through that. It's so hard. Like, how can I help you? What, do you have dinner tonight? Really treating that grief at the same level as a human loss. Or you can have someone say, it's just a dog. Like there are tons of dogs down at the shelter. Just go get another one, right? And that makes me would make me hesitant to bring up the topic at all. So disenfranchised grief, I think, is often when people kind of hide it, bury it, and are afraid to talk about things because they don't know the reaction they might get. So writing this book, in part, I was inspired to do it because I wanted to try to show people who are reading it that they are far from alone in these feelings. There are so many people who feel the same way, and so many people, professional people, like animal chaplains, who are there to help you during these hard times.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely sort of, and I don't know if it's just that I'm sort of recent into the dog world in the last 10 or 15 years, or if maybe it's just become more popular, but I certainly see a lot more people being able to reach out and get help, professional help. There's people who are, therapists who their work is to help people get through pet loss. I think that's a really nice sort of happening. So for your book, you researched different ways that people memorialize their pets, including in the past historically. So what did you learn about mummification?
Yeah, so mummification was one of the I think one of the oldest traditions in terms of memorializing and burying pets. There's, sort of classic burial, and then mummification was popular in ancient Egypt and in Peru. And it was really interesting to learn about that because, at least in ancient Egypt, people honored their pets with the same love and care and, prepared the body, wrapped the body, cleaned the body, and placed it in these beautiful, tombs and sarcophagus, forms, just like they would a person as well. And I did learn that there are different types of animal mummies, so not every animal that was mummified was a pet necessarily. That archaeologists have found. There's some that were offerings to different gods, and there were some actually that were considered food, right? So if somebody wanted to have food in the afterlife, maybe a chicken would be mummified, so they would have a chicken to eat. But there were definitely a lot of pets, and one professor of archaeology who I interviewed and write about in the book, Salima Ikram, she talks about, you can tell often if an animal was a pet based on the paintings in the tomb. If she talks about seeing one that was a man with a cat curled on his lap, and you could guess, okay, the cat in this space is probably very important to him. or even just the posture of like sometimes having a dog and a person be separately mummified but in the same sarcophagus together, sort of like maybe they shared a bed at night when they were alive as well.
Very cool. As an archaeologist, I find that super interesting too. Yeah. So another way that some people memorialize their pets is through taxidermy. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I tried really hard when I was researching this book to go into all types of memorializing pets with a very open mind. I really didn't want to go into anything in a judgmental way because I had felt so judged in the past sometimes. But I will say the two that I sort of went into not really knowing what to expect was taxidermy and cloning, actually, which I write about in the same chapter in the book. Um, and part of me, like a little judgmental part of me was like, are these people who can't let go and like accept that their pet is dead and they're trying to like reanimate their pet or like, preserve their pet in this way? And when I interviewed both taxidermists and people who had their pets preserved in that way, I actually found that they were some of the most in touch with death people I spoke with. They were very aware that, a taxidermy form of a dog is not the same as their dog, when their dog was alive. And I was really blown away by sort of the approach of thinking about it as a form of an art form, like making a beautiful 3D sculpture, almost like having a photograph that's more detailed and three-dimensional to have in your home to honor your pet. And a lot of the people who pursued taxidermy or cloning often had animals with very unusual fur patterns, or there was something very distinctive about their look. Maybe they were a mixed breed that was, very hard to recreate. And I was really impressed by sort of the way that they could all look death in the face every single day. Like one woman I interviewed had her Boston Terrier named Ace taxidermied, and she keeps him in a glass case that she uses as like a side table in her house. And she says she likes like seeing him there. She says hi to him in the mornings. Her son, tells his classmates that they have a live kitty and a dead puppy at home, which I always think is very cute, like that he thinks of him as one of their pets. But she knows that's not Ace as he was alive anymore, but she likes that he's still present in that way. So I thought it was really cool to learn about the different techniques, and it got me thinking. I have pet tortoises, and I was like, maybe I'll preserve their shells once they're gone, though they'll probably outlive me. So
The pain of losing a pet is profound. I think everybody here is going to accept that. Yet they bring us a lot of joy, and there's a lot of joy in your book. So what does your book teach us about the joy of having a pet?
yeah, I over and over while I was writing this book and researching the topic, I would keep asking myself, why do we do this to ourselves? Like nobody really forces you to have a pet. You don't like accidentally, don't use a condom and end up with a kitten, right? Like, it's a choice that people make. I mean, I will say I interviewed a lot of parents in my book who maybe say they felt they didn't have a choice in getting a pet, that their children forced them to get a pet, and then the kids went off to college, and then suddenly this like cat or dog was their new best friend. Um, but it's a choice that we make over and over to have these animals. And even though it is brutal when they die, like my dog Seymour just died in June, and I'm still so upset about it and will be for a while, you know, it's something that we choose to do over and over again. And so I was like, there must be something that makes it worthwhile.
Mhm.
And I actually really think that in some ways, pets bring us so much joy because they remind us of how short life is and how close death is really at any moment. And I think that in order to really appreciate, just like the beauty of taking your dog for a walk on a gorgeous fall day, and, appreciating the animals, and Seymour was very prey driven. So he was always pointing out squirrels, pointing out birds. And I just felt very present in a way walking him. Um, and, just always thinking like this could be our last walk. Like he could get hit by a car and this could all end tomorrow, And I think that in some ways it's like counterintuitive, but the sadness and closeness to death makes us appreciate the joy and the happy moments so much more.
Yeah, absolutely. I could be convinced of that. So you have a reading for us, and we'll go
Yeah.
off camera.
So I'm gonna just read from the intro of Good Grief. It goes like this. The grave I was looking for was in a quiet back corner of the cemetery, surrounded by trees. I was grateful for the shade. It was August in Westchester County, and the place was hot. Asphalt pathways crisscrossed rows of blinding granite headstones, and my black dress clung to the sweat on my back. I had spent the afternoon walking up and down the paths of this 4-acre cemetery. Bright spots of metallic pinwheels, mylar balloons, and neon stuffed animals decorated the headstones. Flowers wilted in the summer sun. Under the trees, weaving through the graves, I found the marker, pink granite engraved with hearts. Clarence, it read, my eternal friend and guardian angel. You'll always be a part of me forever. And underneath, obscured by flowers, love, M. I'd read about Clarence. I knew he was a loyal friend, kind, affectionate, and sweet. Even though he ran with a famous crowd, he didn't seem to care about money or celebrity or power. He valued the simple things in life. I studied the dates under Clarence's name, 1979 to 1997. Clarence was 18 when he died, by most cemetery standards, painfully young. But in this cemetery in Hartsdale, New York, 18 is a good long life. I was looking at the grave of Mariah Carey's cat. This was not my first celebrity pet memorial. I've sat at the grave of Donald Stewart, Royal Nelson, and Laddie Miller, Lizzie Borden's Boston Terriers, their headstone engraved with the phrase sleeping a while. I visited Pet Memorial Park in Calabasas, California, where Hopalong Cassidy's horse, Rudolph Valentino, and Humphrey Bogart's dogs, Charlie Chaplin's cat, and one of the MGM lions are all buried. I traveled to a pet cemetery on the outskirts of Paris to see Rin Tin Tin's grave, and I've said a prayer standing over the final resting place of America's hero racehorse Secretariat in Lexington, Kentucky. But every time, what impressed me more than the celebrity pet graves was all the headstones that surrounded them. Celebrities are not alone in burying their dead pets. To the left and right of Clarence's pink granite tombstone were hundreds of graves for other animals belonging to regular people. These memorials were no more or less lavish than the headstone Mariah had engraved for Clarence. And if I hadn't known about the telltale Love M on Clarence's stone, I wouldn't have been able to distinguish his grave from any of the others. Celebrities, I thought, studying the two hearts flanking Clarence's name. They're just like us. By the time I'd visited Hartsdale, I'd already had a long personal history with pet cemeteries. In fact, I went to high school next to one. My school was one of the New England prep schools with facilities better than many colleges on a gorgeous green campus in Dedham, southwest of Boston. This was the sort of school that carefully curated its image, boasting of athletic alumni competing in the Olympics, generations of legacy students, high SAT scores, and extremely competitive Ivy League acceptance rates. Less present in its marketing materials, that the school is located next to several thousand dead animals buried in the Animal Rescue League of Boston's Pine Ridge Pet Cemetery. Pine Ridge is one of the first official pet cemeteries I knew of, but there are more than 700 of them scattered throughout the country. By the time I was 14 and first saw Pine Ridge, I'd already loved and lost many companion animals. I'd also loved to read, and frankly, young adult literature is full of dead pets. I remember that awful dread as the number of pages shrank in each new animal book I read, writes Helen MacDonald in her memoir, H is for Hawk. I knew it would happen, and it happened every time. What happens in Old Yeller? The dog dies. And where the red fern grows? 2 dogs die. The red pony? The pony dies. Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing? The turtle dies. I could go on. When we open our hearts to animals, death is the inevitable price. Jake Maynard, in his essay Rattle, the Recklessness of Loving a Dog, writes that loving an animal is mortgaging future heartbreak against a decade or so of camaraderie. Matthew Gilbert, in his memoir Off the Leash, A Year at the Dog Park, writes, in the course of an average human lifetime, pots and pans and couches and lamps stay with us for longer stretches of time. Even beloved t-shirts survive the decades, the silkscreen album images and tour dates wrinkled and cracked, but still holding on. With a dog, you're on a fast train to heartache. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Beautiful, Evie. Thank you. got a few tears here. So thank you very much for that gorgeous reading. And we're going to move on to Dr. Karen Fine. So Karen, this book is a memoir of your life as a veterinarian, which seems to be both rewarding and difficult. What do you most want people to know about what it's like being a vet?
I guess, you know, there's a wonderful campaign going on now in Australia, and it's one of the things they're saying is we're people too, or we're only human, I think is one of the phrases. And veterinarians have a increased risk of suicide, which I was surprised to find out. And because I sort of, I think I denied to myself the difficulties of the job. And there are many, and I think people assume that one of the, you know, the hardest thing is doing euthanasias. And that certainly is very hard. But I would also put up there giving people bad news is very difficult. That is probably one of the more challenging things to me. And also having these quality of life discussions where the person is conflicted. Is it time? Or, you know, do we have a little longer? Is there anything else we can try? You know, that sort of thing. So, you know, I feel like I see a lot of human suffering. I see some animal suffering, but I see a lot of human suffering in those situations, especially. So I think that's one thing I would say I want people to know about veterinarians is that it is difficult for us for many reasons. And we're also trying to fit this all into a day where we may have a new puppy appointment next. And we may be backed up and we have a client in the waiting room and we didn't expect to diagnose this particular animal with something serious. You know, it just happens during the course of a regular appointment. So that's also can be difficult. Sometimes we know, and sometimes the person bringing the animal in knows, but they don't always know. So I think just to kind of give your veterinarian some benefit of the doubt if they're running behind, that kind of thing, because veterinarians get a lot of negative press on social media, and a lot of it is cost related. You know, my vet won't fix my animal for free, or, you know, I mean, and people feel, you know, they feel guilty, and sometimes that has to come out somewhere, and it might come out at the veterinarian or the staff or the clinic or, you know, whatever. So I think that's, you know, one part of the book that it wasn't the main reason I wrote the book, but part of the book I wanted to be sort of the secret lives of veterinarians.
Yeah, and it's very helpful for that, I think, as a non-vet reading it. That's very interesting. And one of the other themes in the book is of how you were influenced by your grandfather, your opa, so who was a doctor. So can you tell us about his influence?
Sure. He was just such a wonderful, gentle, patient man, and it was really a calling for him to be a doctor. I don't think he ever thought about doing anything else. And he would do house calls. And that really was the, you know, where I had always heard of that and maybe had that in the back of my head, that he really knew his patients so well from seeing them in their homes. And he would see them in his office as well, but he really knew who they were. They weren't just numbers to him. They were truly individuals, and he treated them as such. And that just was a really huge influence on me, the fact that he did home visits and how he was so committed to helping keep people healthy.
Yeah. And so in your book, you also write about your practice of visiting clients in their homes. So I wondered what you prefer about the home visits compared to when people bring their pet to the office, to the clinic, sorry.
Yeah, that's a great question. There are many differences, and full disclosure, I don't do house calls anymore. I stopped during COVID, and I had been doing house calls for 25 years. So I kind of thought, well, you know, this is a good time to stop. And I was writing more, so that seemed to be taking more of my time. But one big thing is that I didn't have a technician or support staff person to come with me. Some house call vets do. I did not. When I looked into the insurance, it seemed prohibitive. So I just sort of thought, okay, I'm just going to keep doing this by myself. So I really relied on the pet parent to help me. And I had to be very patient. And sometimes I had to say, we're just not going to get this blood draw today. I had to rely on food rewards and, try different things. Okay, if it's not working in this room, let's go in a different room. Maybe he'll do better on the sofa than in the kitchen or something like that. I definitely got to know my clients pretty well being in their homes. I did a lot of appointments, especially cats would be in like people's bedrooms. So I'd be looking at the cat, which was sleeping on their bed, so I'd be, in their bedroom, or I'd be in their kitchen, or a lot of times with cats also, I'd be in their bathroom. Because I'd have people, tell people to leave the cat in the bathroom so that they couldn't run away and hide when they smelled me, and the cats would recognize me. So it took longer, and I was kind of glad to take my time. I didn't feel as rushed and pressured as I did in a clinic setting. But now, working more in a clinic setting, I see many of my old house call clients and patients there, so that's wonderful. But it is nice to have the staff there to help with certain things, and especially as I get older, it's harder and harder to get off the floor once I'm down on the floor with an animal. So say, down on someone's bathroom floor with their cat, that just started kind of getting old. So there's definitely pros and cons.
Yes. And you also use Western veterinary medicine as well as acupuncture and Chinese medicine, which you write about in the book. So I wondered if you could tell us something about that and why you like to use these different approaches.
Sure. And at this point, I've been doing what's called integrative medicine, using both Western and Eastern medicine longer than I practiced using just Western medicine. So I'm very used to using both. And it's a whole different way of diagnosing traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM. So I really enjoy using that. And sometimes when Western medicine doesn't have either anything or much to offer, or say that it's cost prohibitive, whatever Western medicine has to offer. Sometimes, for instance, with cancer, I can look at the animal and say, okay, well, we're going to come at it from this other approach, and see if we can get that animal to have some quality of life for longer than we thought they could. So that's what I really enjoy about that. It's just a different way of looking at the animal.
That's good to know. Thank you. And so when there's more than one pet in the home, sometimes the ones that are left can grieve or the loss of one of their animal companions. So how do you think people can help their pets to deal with that kind of grief?
Yeah, I think, kind of recognizing that they're going to be grieving also. And I don't think animals are as confused as people sometimes think, because I think when there is an illness in a pet in the household, the other animals know probably better than we do that other pet is sick. Their sense of smell and their intuition, I think, is just so much stronger. So they, really recognize that, even if they weren't able to see the body. I think that they recognize that their friend, their housemate, their family member was very, very sick. And I think trying to, keep to some sort of a routine. It might be establishing a new routine. It might be sticking somewhat to the old routine to give them that comfort. And then taking some time out of the day to spend with them. And a lot of times people have told me, when there are multiple animals, that there's a whole sort of restructuring of the social order. That's sort of one animal that may have been more quiet and in the background is now sort of coming to the forefront or whatever. So they definitely, it's in some ways, I would say it's a more profound change for the animal, especially if they live in the home and they don't go out, because we're probably going out to work, or we're working from home, or whatever we're doing. But our home is, sort of their whole life. So it's a huge change for them. So just expecting them to be kind of off, and then trying to help them with, maybe more walks, more toys, more attention, those sorts of things.
Thank you. And I know that you've prepared a reading for us, so I'll ask you to do your reading now, and the rest of us will go off camera.
Sure. And this reading at the beginning, so I'm not going to read the beginning part of it because it's a bit too long, but it's about how I meet my best friend Lisa because she calls me about her old cat named Mimi who has urinated on her head. And I do some blood work. We find out that Mimi has something called chronic renal failure, which is common in older kitties. So yet a few years passed and Mimi hung on. She was ancient and mostly incontinent. Most of the time she slept. Lisa and her husband Joe were planning a 3-month sabbatical in Mexico. They intended to drive there in their station wagon, along with their 2 large dogs, camping along the way. Before they left, Lisa reluctantly decided it was time to schedule Mimi's euthanasia. Joe would be at the house by himself for the appointment, she explained, because he was a paramedic and didn't mind dealing with medical procedures. Lisa herself felt uncomfortable with the thought of being present when Mimi died. I understood. Lots of people don't feel comfortable witnessing euthanasia procedures, and I never pressured someone to be present for the procedure if they didn't want to be. On the appointed day, I drove to Lisa's house. Lisa met me at the door with a broad smile. I was confused. Why was she home? And why was she smiling? Joe had a great idea, Lisa proclaimed. I glanced over at Joe, who was standing in the kitchen. His arms were folded and his lips compressed as he stared off into the middle distance. He did not look like a guy who'd had a great idea. I turned back to Lisa. Last night, I was crying and crying and crying about Mimi, my friend explained, the words tumbling out as they did when she was happy and excited about something. And then Joe said the only other option would be to bring her with us. And I said, yes, that's it. We'll bring her with us. Bring her with you, I repeated. Sure, she's always been good in the car. We won't even know she's there. Camping? I asked, trying to picture sleeping in a tent on a cross-country road trip with a frail incontinent cat in addition to 2 large dogs. Are you sure? Of course, said Lisa. She'll be fine. It's the perfect solution. I looked over at Joe again. He was shaking his head in resignation. Lisa's mind was made up, we could tell. Little Mimi was going to Mexico. I got to see it firsthand. Lisa and Joe invited me to visit them during their stay in Mexico, and I spent a wonderful week with them. We joked that it was my farthest house call. They had rented a small apartment near the beach in a little town. Mimi was a sweet little thing, light as a feather, and seemed happy to snooze in her little bed in the kitchen, enjoying her sabbatical. Eventually, Mimi and her humans traveled back to Worcester, the little cat at one time alarming Lisa by wandering some distance away from the car at a rest stop. She continued her routine of sleeping much of the day and urinated wherever she chose, but never again on Lisa's head. Mimi surprised us all and lived for several more months before Lisa made the euthanasia decision again. This time, Mimi had stopped eating, and Lisa knew there would be no reprieve. The setup would be the same as we had discussed before. Joe would be at home alone when I arrived. As I drove to Lisa and Joe's house for Mimi's second euthanasia appointment, I wondered whether the procedure would be different with a client I knew well who had a medical background. Joe had seen death before. He would take this in stride, I imagined. Also, Mimi had been more Lisa's cat than his. Joe met me at the door, holding Mimi in his arms. His face was red and soaking wet. Tears dripped down both cheeks, which he made no attempt to wipe. His nose dripped too, as he bent his head to kiss Mimi's soft fur. I didn't think I'd be this upset, he choked out. Oh, that's okay. Of course that's okay, I said, giving him a quick hug. It's just, we've had her for so long, he gulped. She's been such a good cat. Mimi had been old ever since we had known her, and because she had lived for so long, it was hard to believe her time had finally arrived. She died peacefully in Joe's arms as we cried together. Joe and Lisa later planted a tree for her in their garden to honor this little old cat who had gone on a sabbatical to Mexico and who brought my friend and me together. That's it.
so much. That's very touching. All of these readings are so touching and so beautiful. Thank you. So a reminder to the audience that you still have time to type questions into the Q&A. We'll be able to get to a few of them. I've got a quick question for every author before we get to those, though. I'm going to ask everyone just very quickly to tell us. I've asked this question of every author at BarkFest, basically, and I've asked it about dogs, cats, or animals in general. So you can pick whichever of those seems most appropriate to you. But I would like to know what brings you hope for the animal-human relationship. And I'm going to start with Reverend Sarah Bowen, please.
The joy of seeing a squirrel bound across the yard.
I love that. Thank you. And EB, what brings you hope?
I actually think social media brings me hope because I joke it's the last nice place on the internet. When people post about their pet losses, it's such a wonderful space for people to reach out and connect.
Thank you. Yes. And Dr. Karen Fine?
So I feel like forums like this bring me hope because I feel like it's more and more recognized how profound and intimate and intense these relationships can be and how privileged we are to have them. And I feel like that's being more and more recognized, which is wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And so we don't have a huge lot of time left, so I'm just going to quickly turn over to Christy to curate some audience questions.
Sure, we definitely have some good questions, I think, here. So Kate asks, Sarah, it sounds like there's a lot of crossover between what you do and what end-of-life doulas also do. How do you work with people like agnostics or atheists who don't have a spiritual belief system or religious foundation?
Sure. There is some overlap. Animal chaplains also work with non-end-of-life situations. So that would be one of the distinctions between an end-of-life doula and an animal chaplain who covers the entire scope of an animal's life. What we talk about now are systems of meaning making. So anyone on the planet has a system of meaning making, whether that's religious or it's spiritual or it's atheist or agnostic or it's secular, or you have no idea what your system of meaning making is. But we all have ways that we make meaning of being here on the planet. And so a chaplain's going to work with someone to figure out, how do you make meaning of what's going on right now and what would be supportive based on your beliefs, right? Everyone has beliefs, not necessarily religious beliefs, but how are you making meaning of what's going on right now? And what are the big questions that you have that need to be attended to and heard compassionately? I would go on for an hour, but I have 30 seconds to answer that. So that's where I'm going to put it in a great question. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So we have an anonymous attendees asking, could the panelists talk about dealing with the burden of anticipatory grief? My beautiful beloved young dog has chronic illnesses and is already past her predicted life expectancy. I am giving her the best life, but the anticipation is sometimes overwhelming. So maybe Karen and Evie, I will ask you both to weigh in. Yeah.
Yeah, I can talk about that. It's something that I see a lot, and I think as veterinarians and veterinary staff, we experience it, possibly more than the general public because we see all kinds of trauma and things, and we think, well, that could have been my animal. And then you come home at night and there's your animal and it doesn't have the same problem as the one you saw at work, but it could. So that's a really tough one. And I really struggled with that myself. And I wrote about that in my book, actually, because my dog Rana lived a lot longer than she was supposed to. And I finally, I think just from a personal perspective, I started saying to myself, not today. It's not going to be today. And I think, just trying to learn from the mindfulness that animals have, that they are so in the moment and that we can be in the moment with them and that we don't want to spend the time that we have with them. It sounds easy, but it's really impossible. It's just to sort of the best that you can. And I think recognizing that this is a normal and very common thing, anticipatory grief, which is also disenfranchised, like we were talking about before. I think recognition towards it can hopefully go a long way.
Yeah. EB?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo all of those things. I think I'm someone who has pretty terrible anxiety, and so I'm always thinking worst case scenarios. Even when my dog was not sick, every time we went on a walk and like the FedEx truck would go by and get too close to him, I would think like, oh my gosh, like you could get hit, by a truck any day. And I think really trying so hard to remember animals don't worry about the future in the same way people do, and just being present. And, I often found my animal was the way I could guide myself out of the anticipatory grief, watching Seymour, trot along and smell the flowers and bark at squirrels and, and just enjoy that moment. And I tried really hard to focus on those things and enjoy that as well, because I didn't want to waste my precious time with him worrying about the future. So it's obviously easier said than done.
Yeah, for sure. So it is 11 on the nose. Sassy, should we pitch this last question to the group, or do you want to
You can pitch it, that's
close things
okay.
off? Pitch it? Okay. So Mary asks, I wonder if any of the authors are familiar with a piece of prose by Irving Townsend. It might be called A Fragile Circle. It describes how I feel. So has anyone? No. Oh, Sarah has.
Sarah.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful piece. And I think what you speak to even more broadly is the power of poetry and the power of being able to use that at times to express or to notice what we're feeling. We might not have the self-awareness. And then we read someone else's words. You read Townsend's words and say, this is how I feel. So being able to, like Evie said, on social media or reading books that people have written or reading poetry, I think even broader, that's a beautiful practice. But yeah, I would search that out. I think it's actually, I'm not sure that's exactly the title, but if we search Irving Townsend, everyone right now, it will come up on Google.
I bet somebody's
Thank
already
you.
put it in the chat.
Thank you. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for. But I would like to thank our authors, Reverend Sarah Bowen, Evie Bartels, and Dr. Karen Fine, for an absolutely beautiful and very, very touching session. And I don't know if the authors have seen, there's been lots of very appreciative comments in the chat. So thank you very, very much for coming to talk to us today and doing such gorgeous readings as well. And so I want to remind everyone that there is a chance for someone who's here now to win a copy of the books. So that's Sacred Sendoffs, Good Grief, and The Other Family Doctor, as well as a copy of Bark. And I will be doing that draw in about 10 to 15 minutes time. And the link to the recording will go out within the next 3 days. If there's a delay, thank you for your patience and thank you for being a wonderful audience. Thank you to Christy for being my co-host, to my husband for some tech help because we've had some tech challenges, and to my publisher Greystone Books for some help behind the scenes as well. But special thanks to our authors, Sarah, Evie, and Karen. You've been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
So much.